Welcome back to the final session of the final day of LeadersWeek.direct, and I think it's a session that will resonate with everyone all over the world because it's about operating a sports business when there are no fans, and I think lots and lots of CEOs and leaders will be experiencing exactly this problem. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio live by Laurie Dalrymple, who's the CEO of Harlequins. He's made a long commute. Actually, the other side of that stand, he's just walked around from the stoop to be with here today. But thank you very much for being here, Laurie.
Nice to be here, thanks.
So, Laurie, you joined the club in November 2019, and one of the first things you did was to set a new strategy, which was pre-COVID. It was in January 2020. So why did you feel the need for a new strategy, and what was it?
So I joined nearly a year ago. It's been quite a turbulent year, which obviously none of us were predicting. We got the club together in January, and we got the company together, and I guess started to try and build a bit of a vision as to where we wanted to go over the next sort of 2 to 3 years, and that was built around, ultimately, in any elite sport environment, you need to be performing on the pitch. So we built a plan around wanting to be consistently performing, competing on the pitch, and then we wanted to build a plan around developing our fan growth and engaging with our fans in a more engaging way. And it's not to say that we weren't at that moment in time, but I think it's just about revising and refreshing what you're doing in order to engage and grow a broadening audience, diversifying our audience, and then having done that, looking at ways in which we can commercialise our business more efficiently, more slickly, more innovatively. And we sort of, as I say, we sat down across the breadth of the club, from playing, coaching, all of our staff across the stadium and the training ground, and kind of agreed a plan of taking the club forward. And then I'd say within a space of 6 weeks from that point, everything started to get turned on its head.
So what's changed since? I mean, has the strategy changed? Are you accelerating certain aspects of it and pulling back on others?
It's a good question. I think in principle, actually, a lot of the main things remain pertinent and relevant now. So engaging with our fan base now is actually more important than ever before. And finding a way to create and drive content to our supporters and our fans is hugely critical now. Obviously, we still want to diversify and grow. If anything, again, that's the relevance of that is more significant, because our fan base, like many sports clubs, is very strong in the sort of the 40s, 50-year-old sort of bracket and upwards. So it's further highlighted the need to diversify into a much younger supporter base. Winning consistently and being competitive on the field remains an absolute yardstick for who we are as a club. We firmly believe we're one of the biggest clubs in English rugby and in terms of club rugby globally. So we know that we need to continue or sort of develop how we sort of do that part of our sort of programme. But clearly, generating revenue and commercialising our business has now become significantly harder, as it has for many clubs and many other businesses and other sectors. But some of the metrics that we rely on to drive revenue into our business have all but completely stopped. So it's, in terms of how we're looking to grow financially, then we are presented with a significant challenge.
We'll touch on that in a moment, but could you just describe the sort of perilous nature of the situation for Harlequins right now?
Well, like many other clubs, and I think it's important to differentiate elite rugby from, per se, like elite football. So Premier League football, where overwhelmingly 80-85% of a club's revenue stream comes from broadcasting, predominantly. I know there's probably some outliers to that. We understand that. In rugby, it's far more akin to, say, Championship football, where the turnovers aren't too dissimilar, and the income stream models are not too dissimilar. So I'd say 25% of our revenue comes from central distribution or broadcasting, central sponsors. And about 75%, well, I'd say 75-80% of our income comes from some of that distribution from centrally, but it comes from ticketing, it comes from hospitality, it comes from our ability to drive our own sponsorship, commercial income. And if, say, 65% is ticket related, 70% is ticket related, then that's a huge amount of revenue for us to try and backfill from other means. So, and meanwhile, elsewhere around the business, we're doing a huge amount of work around preservation and ring fencing our income streams as much as we can. So the situation is serious. We have got shareholders who have been part of this club for 25 years. So we are, I guess, fortunate in that respect that they remain hugely committed. And everyone's put a huge amount of blood, sweat and tears into ensuring this club is where it is today. We've been inundated with support from our fans and supporters who, in a large part, are still able to continue to support the club, and we're extremely grateful for that level of commitment. But it's a very, very serious situation, and if there isn't a fundamental change ultimately to how we are permitted to exist and how the sport is going to be permitted to continue in the coming months, then that situation is going to get even worse.
You know, if you look at rugby as a sport, I think Nielsen came out recently and said that 27% of the UK population are interested in rugby. So it didn't have widespread appeal beforehand. So there were some underlying challenges before. Yep. The tide's gone out on rugby, and it's exposed a number of weaknesses. What do you think those weaknesses are in the whole business model?
Well, I think that's a good question. You're right in the sense that we don't, in terms of what we compete with, in terms of broadcast space, but also consumer interest, it doesn't compete with football. So that's one of the areas where we need to sort of try and readdress a bit of that balance. There's a big interest in international level rugby, test level, so the likes of here in Twickenham, and some of the other sort of bigger sort of test level brands. So I think club rugby per se has got some work to do in order to try and recapture some of that sort of market space. But going back to the question you asked at the outset, in terms of some of the key markers that we identified back at the start of the year, one of the reasons we were looking at the composition of our fan base and our database and who we sort of engage with and who we communicate to. One of the reasons is because our community is just not big enough. We need to be going to a much bigger consumer base. We need to be taking this sport to more consumers, to more eyeballs. We need to be getting more people playing it at grassroots level, which is why it's not just the easy thing to look and assess at this current moment in time is how much the elite game is being affected by the lack of supporters coming through the gates, by the lack of money that's coming into the sport, and the risk to the top end, which is pertinent, and that's accurate. We have to look at that, because without the top end, the rest of the game ultimately would suffer significantly. But I guess it's the wider grassroots element of sports, and rugby is no different in that respect, that if we cannot get the top end of the game functioning, then everywhere else is going to suffer significantly as well.
Are you worried about the grassroots now?
Yeah, I am, definitely. I mean, you only have to look at certain elements from the central governing authority and what the effect is going to be there. And we're a small to medium-sized business, that if we physically can't, being allowed or being permitted to exercise or execute programs that allow physical contact, and live sport is all about contact and engagement. The more that's hindered and prohibited, that's going to be a big problem for us. And also, not just at community level, but you look at some of our academy programs that are now, we're not forecasting or expecting them to potentially be turned on into the new year. So when you talk about the development programs, we're getting our young athletes from the academy program into the elite level.
Yeah.
And I heard an interesting piece on the radio yesterday. Gareth Thomas was sort of predicting the damage to the elite end of the game by effectively switching the whole thing off for a year. And the transition of young aspiring players and athletes that are coming through at that level is undoubtedly, it could have a profound effect on the development of the game in the months and years to come. So it is a concern.
I would imagine at a certain level, boys and girls are playing lots of different sports.
Yeah.
So if some sports are able to get back to normal quicker than rugby because it's not such a contact business, sport, then that does pose a kind of issue in a way.
Yeah, no, it does, and I think one of the areas why we've had it slightly harder is because of the nuances of our sport. It is far more physical. The levels of contact are far greater than other sports. So we've had to go, certainly, at the top end, as we've got our men's programme back up and functioning. It took us many weeks in order to find. Well, it took many weeks of planning. And to be fair, credit should go to the various sort of bodies that have allowed that planning process to be executed. And it's only taken until this last week now where we've actually fundamentally had an issue that we need to deal with. So we've gone through weeks of testing and training and playing. But yeah, it's very difficult. And if you can imagine that level of complexity at the top end, then when you then extrapolate that out into amateur level, social rugby, the risks, obviously, the contact risks remain at that level as well. So it's very difficult.
Laurie, you've got back playing now, which is a positive. You also did have a test event, and you obviously will have gone through lots of protocols and processes and learnings and plannings to get that into a place where it could actually be played, that game. Could you just talk us through some of the sort of things that you did and some of the pinch points that you anticipated along the way? Yeah.
So that was, that's a lesson, if you like, on resilience and resolve, and you find out a lot about yourselves. I think you find out a lot about your team and in those sort of environments. And we think at Harlequins we've got a really strong, efficient, professional team. We included our submission into a league-wide submission that went into government about pilot events because, as I say, having spectators coming through the gate safely and securely is the lifeblood of the club, not just from a financial perspective, but having that level of engagement with the team and from club to supporter is hugely important. So we were fortunate enough to be awarded one of the few pilot events that managed to get out the door before things changed, which equally then makes us slightly privileged in the sense that, one, we've had the opportunity to do it, but two, we've got visibility now on the process and the data and the post-event surveys that we've done in terms of fan feedback and government feedback and local council feedback. So we feel, as I say, we feel quite privileged about that because we feel like it puts us in a position of advantage in terms of how we go forward, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in a second. But yeah, we were given a very short space of time to turn it around, approximately 8-9 days. We'd submitted within our sort of tender, if you like, we said we felt we would be comfortable with 4,000 fans coming into the ground. And that was built around a certain rationale. In the end, we probably had about 3,200 in the stadium on the day. So we downsized it slightly just to be prudent. And yeah, we had to go through a really rigorous process, I guess convincing the local authorities that this was not a irresponsible or a cavalier sort of thing to do. And it wasn't so much about, and this is a really crucial point, I think, it's not so much about giving comfort to the people that were coming to the event. It was more about giving comfort to the people who weren't coming to the event. Because we've got a very active, evolved community here in Twickenham, who are obviously very familiar with rugby, as you'd understand. But again, if you go back to, I guess, maybe some of the age demographics and the age sort of complexion of our community, understandably, not everyone does want to go to a live event. And so we went through a very strategic process with our local council, explaining to them a very clear communication strategy about how we wanted to engage the community, about how we wanted to make it safe and secure. So everybody that came to the event was a season ticket member. So we had all of their data anyway. So and we went through a ballot process. So it was people that were within our season ticket pool for the current season we were in. And that process took three or 4 days. Then we balloted tickets out. They were all of the ticketing restrictions were compliant with social distancing guidelines. And we partnered with an AI company that allowed us to then map through the stadium. Once we'd had the ballot completed, we could map where we were physically going to put everybody. But there was heavy restrictions in terms of we prescribed exactly when people could come to the stadium. So they were given a specific time slot. Okay. They were given a specific gate to come through. Okay. We had taken on additional resource around car parking, and we were actively encouraging people not to come on public transport. Yeah. Which to some degree, as much, we obviously encourage people to come and enjoy their day and drink responsibly and enjoy themselves. which again is another sort of obviously important income stream for us. But we wanted to make sure that this event was not about revenue generating. This was about clearly displaying that we had the robust ability to deliver events safely and securely. So having got them in, came through a specific gate, they were then obviously restricted to their seats. The tickets were non-transferable. They were ID checked on arrival, random temperature checks. There was one-way flows around the stadium. Our club shop was heavily sort of governed in terms of footfall through the door. And then the other two major things were we seat served, which we've not done before.
Okay.
So again, if you talk about the learnings that come out of the situation that we're in, and we as a group and as staff often talk about not coming through this with some of the same inefficiencies that we had before.
Yeah.
So this is definitely something that we developed and explored with our catering partner, Levy Restaurants, where there was a QR code on the back of the seat. They could scan it, upload their payment details, and then the F&B was just literally delivered to their seat.
Why didn't we do this before?
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think we'll take it with us on the journey where we go. How easy it would be to service in a normal environment with 15,000 people in the ground will remain to be seen.
Yeah.
So we did have the advantage that we had free aisles and space, but it's the perfect opportunity for us to test this. And it took. We converted 1,800 orders on the day with very little. I'm not saying everyone was absolutely slick, but very, very little problems. Yeah. And everyone had a great day. And then the other sort of big piece is in terms of how we then egressed people out the ground as well, because that was one of the big considerations to the council was around, well, look, when the whistle goes, and we won't necessarily talk about the result or the performance on the afternoon too much, but we had the slight issue that before the final whistle, kind of the result was slightly out of reach for us. So you've got the issue where fans maybe want to leave a bit early. Don't want to dwell on that, as I say. But we were specifically asking people to stay in their seats, and then we egressed the ground in compartments and chunks that were then relevant to the gates that we were opening up. And I have to say, not only do you learn a lot about your workforce and your team, but we learned a lot about our supporters in this environment. And as I say, they've been hugely loyal and committed. But to a man, or to a person, they were massively compliant on the day, and we had very, very, very few difficulties in terms of execution. Single biggest lesson you learned from that test event? Good question. I think, what I'd say as a takeaway, surprisingly, the capacity that you can get in the ground is then determined by how you sell tickets. So in a new environment where you're obviously having to social distance in the ground, when you're selling in numbers or bundles of 1 and 2, you're then going to be taking out a greater degree of seats than you would do if you were selling in bundles of 4, 5 and 6. So I think we would be, and we deliberately kept it to members for the first occasion because they've stuck through us through the last few months. But I think we would potentially look at ways in which we could diversify to allow greater socially distanced bubbles that were safe, but then able to come in and experience live sport in a slightly different way in the ground. I'm confident we could, even in current social distancing limitations, we could get to 4,500, maybe 5,000 currently, safely and securely. And that's kind of the message that we're trying to say at the moment. We don't need to row back to zero. We're confident we can do this safely and securely.
So what do you need right now? I mean, you're in a very difficult financial situation. You're staring down the barrel. What do you need?
Principally, we can't continue to exist in a world where we don't engage with our fans and supporters. So we need to be in a position whereby we can get supporters back into the ground. And as I say, look, no one's got any interest in behaving irresponsibly or cavalier. We deal with the welfare of individuals on a daily basis. We've got a high level of contact in our sport, so we have to manage individuals' health and well-being, and we think we've proven that we can do it. And so getting supporters back in a safe, graduated way is our first priority. We have to be able to do that. I think we've demonstrated that we can do that. And the longer this goes on, when you think about sport being a multi-billion pound business and economy, and what it in terms of brings us into the public purse, then I don't think that this is an environment that we can sustain for a huge amount longer. So to be fair, we are engaged with government about how they can help us, what they can do to support. But if we can't get supporters back into the ground anytime soon, there has to be a much broader discussion about how sports like rugby, it's not just about rugby. Obviously, rugby is my chief priority, Harlequins is who I'm most focused on ensuring this future sustained success for. But other sports are in the same boat. And as I say, we need to be having positive dialogue with government about this future sustainability.
And if I was the sort of sports minister now, or the prime minister now, and you were sitting opposite them, what would be your pitch? Because I'm sure lots of industries are saying we need support, we impact, the economy, the country, etc.
Yeah.
What's your pitch?
Well, with Boris, I think he's a big rugby fan. So, but no, joking apart, I think what we've proved at Harlequins is that, well, one, we're an outdoor sport.
Yeah.
So I think having some consistent understanding around where the rules and regulations are being applied would help. But being an outdoor sport, being a club and a business that's clearly demonstrated that we've done it in the past and we can do it, I feel that live sport has the ability to create a bit of a blueprint about how other industries and sectors can do it as well. So in terms of a pitch, I think it's, come and read the data, have a look at the feedback, look at what some of your council colleagues have subsequently then said worked extremely well. We've got the clarity around the project and how it was executed. I think we've clearly demonstrated that we've got the bandwidth to do it and support others in trying to get out the door as well. Yeah,
and of course the societal impact sport has on everyone's life as well. I mean, obviously that cannot be ignored,
No, it's huge. And as I say, to be fair, like we're being engaged with. I had an hour and a half with the local MP for Twickenham week before last, and we talked about all of those things. We talked about the financial impact. We talked about the financial impact of sport in whole, but also about organisations like here, the RFU, Harlequins, what it means for the community. We're one of the biggest employers in the region. We're not the biggest, but we're one of the biggest. And then when you look at our supply chain and the ramifications of us completely stopping our business from an employment perspective, supply chain perspective, the power of sport to drive collective spirit, that mental well-being development, physical well-being development. You look at the work that our community do. We've got over 40,000 kids that go through camps, rugby camps, through the year. Our foundation delivers huge amounts of hours of contact on a number of different projects that aren't necessarily all about physical education or physical sport delivery. They could be on a number of range of health, well-being sort of subjects. Which, to be fair, the foundation has the ability to operate almost in isolation, but it is massively supported by the club as well. All of those things that get compromised have a huge, profound impact. And so, as I say, what I said earlier, it's not just about the elite and the top end, it's about all the wider ramifications.
Are there any positives that have come out of the COVID crisis?
Yeah, I think there are. And as we as a group have sort of said on numerous occasions, you have to take, if you come out operating at the end of this, and we don't know when the end of this will be, truthfully, but if you come out operating with the same inefficiencies as you had when you went into it, then you've been negligent. So I think we've sort of forensically gone through our business, and we've looked at areas where we can develop. The seat serve thing, as I say, is a classic example. The way in which we communicate with our fans, the way in which we sell tickets, the way in which digitally we operate, I think will be different. Also, even complexities around how we communicate with the team and time that we potentially spend on some face-to-face contact on a Monday morning, for example, when you're doing coach one-on-ones or whatever. And we've now, over the last 6 months, really absorbed ourselves in a Zoom, Teams type sort of, Google Hangout type environment, which I think probably part of us are a bit exhausted with. But again, if you use it to your advantage and you talk about time efficiency, then I think we can find ways in which we engage some of our colleagues in a far more digital way that then gives us more time to go out on the field or go out face-to-face and do more efficient things and proactive things that will drive the business forward when we're through this. So, look, I definitely think there's ways in which we'll come through this for the better. Yeah. And these are maybe some of the things that, frankly, we should have been looking at in the first place.
Yeah. Question about you, because you were brought in to sort of grow the business under very different circumstances, and now you're in a situation where it's survival mode. How's that been for you? And I'm sure there are thousands of CEOs running, franchises all over the world, sort of in the same position as you. Could never have seen this coming, thrown in at the deep end. What's it been like? Give us a sort of your sort of view on that.
It's I don't think it's easy for anybody. I've sort of joked once or twice with the chairman, sort of thing like, only been in 10 months and our turnover's gone, shrunk by 2/3. So that's they're not the sort of the statistics that anyone's particularly proud of. But joking apart, I think you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about your team, about the qualities and the behaviours that you've got. I guess the biggest difficulty is the lack of transparency in terms of knowing what's coming. We've been through, I wouldn't quite say we've given up forecasting, but we've been through 3 or 4 iterations of trying to sort of forecast where we are. And then it's that trying to ensure that you've got a workforce that remains not committed. Everyone's still massively committed. And that's the beauty of elite sport. Generally across the board, you can question anyone within your staff and they're devoutly loyal to the badge and to the cause. But equally, you want to be able to sort of operate in a world where you're giving them complete transparency on what's coming. And the challenges are, and like many other businesses, we've utilised the furlough scheme. We've got a vast majority of our workforce that are now operating at home, that aren't working for the cause through no fault of theirs. They want to be, which provides a different set of stresses and circumstances that you're having to manage people and people's emotions. And then on the flip side, you've got probably 15-20% of your organisation that are working maybe 15, 16-hour days to keep everything going on a workforce that's normally operated by 100 or so people. So it's those sort of challenges, and I say it's been not being able to then get our teeth into a huge amount of the plan that we wanted to get into when we established it in January, and take the business forward really. So it's difficult, but equally, as I say, you learn a lot about yourself, and I think anyone that comes through this experience, whether you're a CEO or otherwise, I definitely think will be significantly better for it. Yeah, 100%.
Final question, and it's a final question about the fans. How have the fans responded? What's been the feedback you've got from them? And has that changed your view and perspective on how important they are to sport and to your particular club?
I don't think it's changed my perspective on how important they are. I think I've always known that they are the supporters of the lifeblood of organisations like Harlequins. So it's just re-emphasised the importance of what they mean to us, because without them, ask any of the players, it's very difficult, or it's much harder for them to compete on a match day, and I think that goes across any sport. You have to dig into your far inner resolve in terms of, when you're sort of maybe a few points down and you're looking for that extra sort of 10%. But they've been absolutely magnificent with us as a club. I can't, to a person, they've been hugely committed. They've been financially committed. They've been emotionally committed. And everybody just wants to see the club continue to thrive and succeed and exist. And that's been the really sort of humbling thing about it. And, when you are having tough times, and you're wondering how you're going to get the team on the pitch, and you're getting emails in from supporters saying, look, we want to remain loyal and committed to the club, and you don't, sometimes you're looking at the fixture list for next year and not having complete clarity around being able to allow them back into the ground, but at the heart of it, they're still utterly committed to what you're doing. It's, as I say, it's makes it rewarding, makes it humbling, and it makes it all the worthwhile.
Well, it's a great way to finish the session on the fans. I'd like to thank you, Laurie, for coming in and sharing your sort of expertise over the last sort of 7 months, particularly, and what you've been through. It's been a fascinating discussion. Wish you and your organisation every success. I hope you get through it. Hope you get what you need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.